All right, welcome back. I'm super excited to chat with Jason here. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear and hard, soft. It's complicated, but easy. It's about building relationships. Some people are really good at it. Some people will say they're bad at it, but there's an interesting dimension: remote versus in person. So, Jason, off the top, what's your take on what does it mean to build relationships? How is it different versus being in person versus being remote? And like how are you feeling here?
Yeah, no. So being in person is always a great thing to get to know someone and be present, be able to be in the same room, read their body language, hear how they are, or just expressing things like how they breathe. Are they under distress? How is your message being received? I use my hands when I talk a lot, which comes across somewhat on video. But you do lose some of that aspect whenever it is on video. Not that it's completely lost, but I always like to be in person just because I think it goes further on building a true relationship.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like we've, for those of us with a few years under our belt, we kind of grew up only having friends in person, right? And then we moved to this quasi social media world, and then COVID hit, and all of a sudden everything is remote. So we have a new generation that's come up with, into the corporate world, and they're like, hey, their first jobs are like, no, my first 5 years or 3 years are like mostly remote. I don't need to do that, right? Like, what do you think we lost? What do you think we lost? What's the benefit?
Well, with being in person, I think you gain a lot of side conversation. I also believe that it's just you hear things that you normally wouldn't hear when the video camera's off. The conversation's off completely. I go to so many meetings to where you actually have the formal presentation or the actual meeting in the 30 minutes or to 1 hour, but there's the 15 minutes before, the 30 minutes after that. You're still carrying on conversations that aren't always just only work focused. They might be an ancillary topic or something that you might have in common.
Yeah.
The remote side, I think it was necessary, but I also know that younger kids want to get that experience and be in person more and more all the time. While we do like to work remote, I think there's a need that we need to be in person and talk
Yeah,
to people.
it's so wild. One of the most fascinating things I think is the data about how much communication is verbal versus nonverbal, right? So I pulled it up. It's 7% of communication is spoken word, so what we actually say. 38% is tone, which that translates mostly in remote Zoom, and then 55% is body language, though, right?
Right.
Um, and what's wild about it is that in Zoom, in remote, it's actually hard because all you can see is like this up here, and then if they don't gesticulate and use their hands a lot, they sit there and they look like, yeah, that
The
sounds really
talking
good.
head.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
The
Like a
talking
bobblehead, right? Um, and so we lose 55% of the communication with somebody.
That's
Um,
amazing.
it's wild, right? That's 55% of the relationship, the connectivity, you have 30 minutes, but not really. You only have, 13 minutes of content that they get to internalize, right? And then we were talking about this recently, like human biology, pheromones. Like, what does that mean? How does that factor? Like, you can't do that over Zoom, right? Like, um,
Exactly. It's so interesting. Like if you think back, at your time as a CISO and even me as a seller, right? I was on the road tremendous amount of time pre-COVID and sacrificed a lot of things personally, but career-wise, made a lot of great relationships and people that really valued my opinion in those times after the fact, which I maintained those relationships post into COVID via video because that's all we had. And I
yeah,
still remember the expansions of that. But I will say this is not as many people that didn't know me beforehand that I had met in person were inclined to speak with me during COVID, and even more so, they were less likely to do a transaction
Yeah,
with me. And
it's a huge. It's really really great insight.
and I believe that you can. There's something about that in person. What would I say at the meeting or the agreement that you have is just a social behavior that it builds more trust
Yeah,
when you are in person. And I'd be curious to in your history, right, as you've done things, is how has that also
I
infected
think
you?
I think it matters a lot, right? Like there's I don't know what it is, what I'd say, but like there's something magical about that an actual handshake, right? Like
Yeah,
it's I don't know if it's a biological thing. I don't know if it's the uh, the lizard brain, social contract type of thing, right? Um, and animals do it too, right? Like when they're getting close, they lean on you. They want
mhm,
that physical touch, and I think that conveys trust, intimacy, whatever that is. And I think it's a risky proposition where we have people who've didn't grow up learning how to operate appropriately. They only did the online thing,
right.
remote, and then they end up at a conference, and it's like, whoa, hey, slow down, buddy. Like,
Don't
uh,
know how to act in person.
yeah, right. And it's because it all carries through. What's the big difference though? So besides like communication and kind of like an overall engagement, like the feeling, do you think it's a different way that you have to prepare for being in person
Oh,
versus
hands
being
down,
remote?
yeah. You have to dress appropriately. We've talked about that, right?
Yeah,
You also need to you have to be more prepared, I think, when you're in person, because you can't sit here and have speakers notes to the left while you're on a screen. You have to go off script. You just can't read a transcript and
you
go
can't
through
have your
your
notes on your fourth
yeah.
monitor,
I
right?
mean, it's great. Granted, it's great, but you actually have to have an understanding of what the business is, why you're there to talk to them about the business, and drive that impact that really matters. And I think that they read how well you understand their business, clients that is, or people you're selling to, just by the way you interact. Because if you're always searching for your notes, or if you're always looking to reference something else, instead of just being there in person and in the moment, you're not looking at your phone to try to find the answer. It's like you actually know what you're talking about. And also you understand their business and the problems they face. In security, you come into some of the most stickiest conversations to help them solve a problem. And there's a big difference whenever you're over the phone trying to solve that problem, or if you met them in person and you actually have that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, this actually puts like this mental image in my mind, right? Like I'm imagining I'm sitting there, you're talking, maybe you're talking to a lawyer about something, and you ask them a question, and they're like, "Oh, hold on," and they start digging through their notes. And you're like, "You don't know that off the top of your head, like, dude, like you should know. I don't know what your job is, but like you should know that, I think, right? But like
Yes.
that kind of gets hidden behind Zoom because you ask someone a question, and they're like slowly typing, you know Gemini pops up with the answer, and they're like, "Oh, I was thinking that, right?" Like you get to obfuscate that. So in person, I think that authenticity becomes more apparent, right? Like you actually know whether they know what the hell they're talking about, or,
And not
you
only
know,
that, it's like you can understand if they care.
yeah,
Like there's a big difference between we were talking about a handshake that means something as opposed to a wet blanket, as I call it, whenever it's real soft. Also, in the same way of how you lean into a conversation. Are you interested in what they're saying? Do you show empathy when there is a situation? How do you respond to really these real life problems? I serviced high net worth individuals who would have just similar problems and concerns like any parent would, but it's at a grander scale because they're targeted because of that. And they don't know you from the next person, and over video, it's really tough to make that connection with someone that's a high net worth individual. But they're just people like anybody else, and they read the room in the same way.
So,
And
okay, so we've been talking about this, but it's not all bad, right? Like a lot of times, like it's almost like we have this old school, camp who are like, you can't be remote, you got to be in person. That's the only way to do business. And then there's the people who are like, I'm only going to be remote. I never want to be in person, right? And I think it's a balance, but there's positives and negatives. What are some of the positives and ways that being remote, like for me, it comes to mind like I don't need to travel to every city. I
right,
can do, I can hit a much broader and then maybe I triage down. So like that feels like a benefit to me, right? Like
for
I,
sure, for
I only
sure.
invest where it
Availability,
makes
availability is probably the number one thing about a video conference. Is someone has a need to speak with you, you can jump on a call in 15 minutes if you're available, and they can be halfway around the world, and it's similar to like being in the room with them. I
yeah.
do think that if you've met that person live, it carries different weight, and you kind of can carry on that relationship via video. But it's accessibility, being able to bring other resources into that call and that conversation very quickly that are experts, I think is a huge benefit. Having the experts in your business being in the conversation with you, where you don't always get to have those resources on site at a individual meeting. But that also brings value to a relationship. I think you can get those things in the same way, but it's a little bit different in the video versus in person. In that.
So so being remote, right? When we're building relationships in remote, some of the benefits are we can broad scale, we can touch people and engage with people at different countries, different time zones, right? Like you cut down on the commute aspect, right? Like I can go talk to somebody in Boston and then 10 minutes later I'm talking to somebody in Chicago, right? Like so that's good. I get to filter, cast a broader net, right? And but then when it's almost like when it levels up, like you have to know when it levels up to be in person, right? Like but sometimes you meet people in person first, at a conference and this
Right.
and this and that, right? So is there a tip, trick, thing, advice of like, hey, you're meeting somebody remote for the first time, right? Like we are we're 2026, we're AI post COVID, go, right? Somebody's going to be the solo founder with $1 billion company kind of thing that people are talking
Right.
about, right? Like, how do you build like when you first meet somebody on Zoom? Is like, should you spend the first couple of minutes actually be like, hey, let's get to know each other? Do you try to read the room? Do you have the homework done so you know whether they like that or not? Like, how do you think about that? Like in general?
Yeah. Well, there's a few things that are kind of simple in that. Is be early to the calls, right? Be on time, have an agenda, keep things tight so that you understand what you're doing. As far as building the relationship, I think you can always have a couple minutes of small talk. People always ask me about Buster Posey, and I don't even live in California anymore, right?
Yeah.
Uh, there's different things that you can do to try to make it a little bit more personal, and I think that does help. But we get on those calls too where there's nobody on camera, and then what do you
Yeah,
do,
those are
right?
brutal.
And now you're on a conference call, which we're used to, right? Also, because that's all we had up until what, right? 2015,
But
2013.
then you're just down to the 7%, right? Then you only got the words, right?
And that's where I would always end up the conversation. If you felt like there was a solution and there was an actual synergy in the voice of the person you're speaking to, that's when I would always go and ask for the in person, right? How do you push them to the next level? And it was almost a qualification of your sales pipeline is, well,
Yeah.
I'm planning a trip that way in 8 weeks. Nobody's really planned out except like the president and very, very important people 8 weeks, but usually they can find a spot on their calendar and you set that time and then you book around it. But it's
That's a
the
great.
It's the willingness to engage directly and personally and travel and be in person, I think actually says something about the character of the individual you're speaking.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I do the same thing, right? Like very similar, meaning like my wife would say, you know, she comes into my office, she's like, it is a train wreck. But from the staging and the framing, it's like, oh, Anthony looks moderately organized, right? And like these are actually, you know, some of the most important books for me that have influenced my life. And it's not that I just want to look at them, but they're great conversation starters. People are like, oh, is that a Dr. Seuss book or is that a Dr. Seuss painting, right? Like, so I do think it's important to be observant when you're talking with somebody. And yes, you're going to talk some business right away or really quickly, but find one thing. It should be from maybe the research, the prep work you've done, something you observe, you know, have a layup ready for something for them to comment on, right? Okay, so that would be one tip of building the relationship in, you know, remote. I think the other piece that I would say, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is I think we have to study it. I think we have to look at, you know, people who are great presenters on camera, and look at what do they do, how do they communicate, and then what can I do, right? Any other tips for the remote? Because I want to get to the back to the in-person.
Yeah, the last one is it's you think it stops at the video, but it actually is just the beginning. I think follow-up is more key in a video conference or video call than anything, because that's the follow-through, right? And that speaks to your character of what type of a person you're going to be in that relationship, especially if it's a vendor-client relationship or an advisement relationship. And how you make and set the tone of that follow-up is very key to like building a good lasting relationship.
No, that's great. And what we should do is, you know, actually just kind of really break this out for folk of like, hey, here's some concrete tips for remote. Here's some concrete tips for building relationships in person. So let's get to the relationships in person. Some people are extroverts. Some people are introverts. Some people are omniverts, right? Whatever. How do you think about this? And let's just use the conference. We got RSA coming up here. You know, Black Hat will be here in a few months. What's some guidance on how to build a relationship in person at maybe a conference?
Yeah, you got to listen. Above all, you got to listen and being an attentive listener and ask questions and follow up questions what you're talking about. Whenever someone comes up and does me, meaning they talk only about product themselves, it's one of the biggest turnoffs for anybody. The second one, which is probably the easiest rule to follow, is the golden rule. I talk to my kids continuously about that and treating others the way you want to be treated. So if you want to be open and engaging and listen and get to know someone, that's received that way. If you're standoffish and you're not listening to someone, you're picking up your phone while they're speaking to you, even whenever you initiated the conversation, I walk away from people like that. Physically turn around and walk away like, hey, you look too busy, I'll catch up with you later. And that's unfortunate, right? And the third one is, you know, say thank you, right? After you finish a conversation, thanks for taking the time to speak with me. I definitely appreciate it. And I think that goes a long way. The please and thank you. This might be my mild manners from the Midwest and those things, but I do find that if you can do those things, usually a pretty good conversation.
Yeah, so I think those are great. I had to take a sec just to type and look something up, right? Which is the Ben Franklin rule, right? This is something I do a lot, right? I try to network and build relationships. Ben Franklin rule is like, hey, if you want someone to like you more, ask them for a favor, which is a really weird thing. And if you haven't read that or heard about it, you should go. There's a whole psychology about it. But what I think is really valuable to do is when you are at a conference or you walk into a meeting, right, and maybe you know one or two people, you can actually kind of hit multiple birds with one stone. Meaning, Ben Franklin rule. I walk up and I see, you know, Jeff here, and I'm like, hey, Jeff, we chat for a little bit. Jeff, who here do you know that that you think I need to know? Right? I'm asking him for a favor. He feels like he's doing something for me, right? Increases him liking me a little bit more. But I'm also now getting a warm introduction from somebody who knows me in some form or facet and is like, oh, I think you need to meet so and so, right? And it doesn't necessarily need to be like who can I sell to that he could, but
Right.
like who do I need to know?
And,
But like you do that, you're gonna spend your 30 minutes, an hour, just warm introductions, meeting people, right?
right. Well, it does a lot for intrinsic value when you ask that. You think of how whenever someone asks you about your opinion, and it's like, who is the right person?
Yeah.
And even better so is that you know who that person is and you can help make that connection and you bring value to both parties. I just think that makes us feel more whole as humans.
I agree. So we've covered some, remote, some of the impacts, like how we think about it remote, some tips. We've covered some tips on, doing it in person. Obviously, this is a huge topic. There's PhD theses and students and, communication experts and, all that. And we're obviously not going to cover it in 20 minutes here. But we appreciate everyone's time. Any final words before we close this chat?
The last piece is what I learned from my very first CEO, and is God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you can listen twice as much as you talk, and that always has stuck with me. I know it's a lot of people say this, but man, we tend to forget it sometimes.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. I think it's great. Listening is a skill, right? Like it's definitely a skill, and I think maybe especially men, we're not really great at it. Right? Like I hear you doesn't mean I listened, right? Like I heard sounds echoing, right? Doing the biological thing, but I think it's a skill. I think we need to lean into it, and that translates for remote and in person. So thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate the time, and we look forward to chatting with you next time.